What if I told you that the assassination of Abraham Lincoln wasn't just the act of a lone madman, but part of a much bigger and darker conspiracy? A secret organization called the Knights of the Golden Circle may have been pulling the strings from the shadows. Today, we're going to uncover whether this secret society was behind one of the most shocking events in American history and what secrets they may still be hiding. April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln sits in Ford's Theater, watching a play, completely unaware that history is about to change forever. Moments later, John Wilkes Booth fires the fatal shot. But behind this tragic event lies a web of mystery, whispers of secret societies, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. Who were the Knights of the Golden Circle? Were they just Southern loyalists? Or puppet masters orchestrating chaos for their own agenda? Today, we're peeling back the layers of this century-old mystery. Imagine the United States in the mid-1800s, a country tearing itself apart over the issue of slavery, power, and the very definition of freedom. The Civil War hadn't yet started, but tensions were boiling. Politicians argued in Washington, newspapers raged in every direction, and ordinary people felt the weight of history pressing down on them. It was in this stormy atmosphere that a secretive organization began to take shape, a group that would soon be whispered about in saloons, backrooms, and even the halls of power. They called themselves the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, the name itself sounded romantic, almost noble, but this was no simple fraternity. The Knights of the Golden Circle, or KGC as some call it today, were said to be far more than just a group of Southern loyalists. They were dreamers, schemers, and possibly even visionaries with a plan that went beyond the borders of the United States. Their goal? To build a vast empire on empire of slavery and Southern influence that would stretch from the American South through Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central America, forming what they called the Golden Circle. At the center of this movement was a man named George W.L. Bickley, a Virginia-born doctor and adventurer who seemed to thrive on ambition and mystery. In 1854, he officially founded the organization in Cincinnati, Ohio, a location that might surprise you since it wasn't deep in the heart of the South. But Cincinnati at the time was a crossroads, a place where northern industry met southern agriculture, where ideas collided as much as goods and people did. Bickley saw it as the perfect breeding ground for his secret society. The KGC operated in layers of secrecy, with rituals, passwords, and ranks that gave it the feel of a shadowy brotherhood. It wasn't just about politics. It was about power, loyalty, and a sense of destiny. Members were said to be sworn in with elaborate ceremonies, pledging their commitment to the cause. These men weren't content with debates in Congress or editorials in newspapers. They dreamed of armies marching under their banner, conquering new lands, and spreading their vision of a Southern-led empire across the Western Hemisphere. But the Golden Circle dream had another, darker side. At its core, the KGC was fiercely pro-slavery at a time when abolitionist movements were gaining momentum. They feared the growing power of the northern states and believed that controlling new territories would preserve and even expand slavery far beyond the American South. To them, the Golden Circle wasn't just about geography. It was about ideology, a way to cement their vision of society for generations to come. As the 1850s rolled on, rumors about the KGC began to swirl. Some claimed they had thousands of members spread across the South and even into northern states. There were whispers of secret meetings in candlelit rooms, of plots to invade Mexico and Cuba, of connections to wealthy backers who saw opportunity in chaos. Newspapers sometimes mocked them, calling their plans grandiose or even ridiculous, but others weren't so sure. The secrecy surrounding the KGC made it hard to tell where the truth ended and the legends began. What we do know is that Bickley and his followers weren't afraid to stir the pot. They organized filibustering expeditions, private military campaigns, aimed at taking over foreign lands without official government approval. These weren't always successful, but they revealed the KGC's boldness and ambition. They saw the turmoil in places like Mexico, where political instability was common, as an opportunity. If they could topple governments or seize control of key territories, they believed the Golden Circle Empire could become a reality. And here's where things start to get even more interesting. Some historians believe the KGC wasn't just a fringe group of extremists with wild dreams. There are hints, though, often debated, that they had ties to influential politicians, military officers, and businessmen who quietly supported their goals. After all, the idea of expanding American power, especially if it meant more land for cotton, sugar, and other lucrative crops, appealed to certain economic interests. The KGC may have wrapped itself in secrecy, but money and ambition have a way of opening doors, even in the most respectable circles. As the 1850s turned into the 1860s and the United States edged closer to civil war, the KGC's activities seemed to intensify. Some reports claim they were stockpiling weapons, recruiting soldiers, and preparing for the conflict they saw coming. They weren't just defending the South, they were thinking bigger, imagining a post-war world where their Golden Circle empire could rise from the ashes of chaos. The Civil War eventually erupted in 1861, and with it came new opportunities and new dangers for the KGC. Some members are believed to have fought for the Confederacy, while others supposedly worked behind the scenes, funding operations or gathering intelligence. Dream of a Golden Circle didn't die with the first shots at Fort Sumter. If anything, the war made them more determined. But here is the part that has kept historians and conspiracy theorists intrigued for more than a century. The KGC didn't just fade away after the war ended. In fact, some believe that defeat only pushed them deeper underground, turning them from a semi-public secret society into a true shadow organization with hidden agendas and long-term plans. And it's within this shadowy world of secrecy and ambition that whispers of a connection to one of the most shocking events in American history begin to emerge, a connection that leads us straight to the night. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, a night when the fate of a nation seemed to hang by a thread, and rumors of secret societies lurking in the background refused to die down. The Knights of the Golden Circle weren't just a secret society looking to protect Southern interests. No, what set them apart from any other political movement of their time was the sheer ambition behind their plans, a vision that went far beyond the borders of the United States. To truly understand their mysterious agenda, we need to step inside their world, into the shadows where ideas of empire and domination burned hotter than any torchlight meeting. At the very heart of the KGC's plan was the idea of the Golden Circle itself, a vast empire stretching outward in a giant ring with Havana, Cuba, at its center. This empire, at least according to their designs, would include the entire American South, Mexico, parts of Central America, the Caribbean islands, and even sections of South America. It wasn't just about land. It was about power, trade, and resources, an economic and military giant under Southern control, one that could rival the great empires of Europe. Why such a massive vision? Because the KGC believed the United States as it existed was fragile, torn apart by political and cultural differences. They saw the rising industrial power of the North, the growing abolitionist movement, and the westward expansion as threats to Southern culture and especially to the institution of slavery, which was the backbone of the Southern economy. The KGC feared that if the South didn't act boldly, it would be crushed by Northern industry, Northern politics, and Northern ideology. So they dreamed bigger than anyone could have imagined. The Golden Circle Empire would ensure slavery's survival by spreading it into new territories. By controlling Cuba, for instance, they would dominate sugar production. By seizing Mexico, they would tap into silver mines, trade routes, and fertile farmland. By taking Central America, they would control the narrow passageways that connected the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans years before the Panama Canal even existed. In their minds, this wasn't just a Southern cause, it was the birth of a new superpower. But here's where things get even more secretive. The KGC didn't just talk about their plans openly. They created layers of codes, rituals, and hierarchies to protect their agenda. New members didn't learn everything at once. The deeper you went, the more you were trusted, the more secrets you uncovered. Some recruits probably thought they were just joining a patriotic Southern organization. Others, the ones in the inner circles, knew there were plans for invasions, coups, and political manipulation on a grand scale. Evidence suggests that they even had what you might call military blueprints. Maps of target territories, lists of potential allies. Discussions about timing and strategy. This was not some drunken tavern talk. These were educated men, some with military backgrounds, some with political connections, thinking in terms of decades, not just elections. They believed history itself could be bent toward their vision if they were bold enough. And bold they were. Throughout the 1850s, the KGC allegedly sent agents into Mexico and Central America, testing the waters for possible invasions. Mexico, in particular, was seen as vulnerable because of its political instability. The idea was simple: topple the government, install a regime friendly to Southern interests, and spread slavery into lands where it had never existed before. They imagined fleets sailing under their command, soldiers marching across borders, and cities falling under the banner of the Golden Circle. Some historians argue that these plans were unrealistic, almost delusional. After all, conquering and holding such vast territories would have been nearly impossible, especially with the United States itself fracturing. But others point out that in the mid-19th century, private military expeditions called filibusters were surprisingly common. Adventurers like William Walker had already invaded parts of Central America on their own. So the idea of a well-organized, well-funded group attempting the same thing doesn't seem entirely far-fetched. What made the KGC even more mysterious was the question of money. Where was the funding coming from? Some researchers believe wealthy Southern planners, terrified of losing everything if slavery were abolished, quietly funneled money into the organization. Others suspect that foreign interests, especially in Europe, might have supported them because a divided United States or a powerful Southern-led empire could benefit European trade ambitions. The truth is murky, hidden in lost records, rumors, and a few scattered documents that survived the chaos of war. And then there's the political angle. The KGC didn't just want soldiers and territory, they wanted influence in Washington. There are claims hard to prove but persistent that some politicians were either sympathetic to their cause or directly involved. After all, before the Civil War, the U.S. government itself had debated annexing Cuba and expanding into Central America. The KGC may have been secretive, but their ideas weren't entirely outside the mainstream of 19th century American expansionism. Still, there was one key difference. The KGC's empire would be built on slavery as its foundation. Every new territory they dreamed of conquering would preserve and expand the institution the North was increasingly fighting to destroy. To them, this wasn't just politics or economics. This was survival. They saw themselves as guardians of a way of life under siege, willing to use secrecy, violence, and even treason if that's what it took to achieve their goals. By the time the Civil War finally erupted, the KGC's grand vision had not yet materialized, but their agenda hadn't disappeared. If anything, the chaos of war gave them new opportunities. Some believe they shifted from dreams of open conquest to covert operation sabotage and possibly even plots that reached into the highest levels of power, plots that would eventually lead to whispers about their involvement. In one of the darkest nights in American history, as the smoke of the Civil War hung heavy over America, a single name was about to be carved into history with the darkest of chisels: John Wilkes Booth. To most people, Booth is remembered as the man who pulled the trigger at Ford's Theater, the man whose single act changed the course of a nation. But what if he wasn't acting alone? What if he was part of something much bigger, something hidden beneath layers of secrecy and conspiracy? This is where the whispers of the Knights of the Golden Circle start to creep in, like shadows moving just out of sight. John Wilkes Booth wasn't just an actor. He was a celebrity of his day, a man admired for his charm, his good looks, and his fiery Southern sympathies. Born in Maryland, a slave-holding border state teetering between North and South, Booth grew up in a world divided, a world where loyalties were complicated and allegiances were often secret. He publicly expressed his disdain for Abraham Lincoln, blaming him for the war and for the South's suffering. But was his hatred simply personal? Or was there something or someone feeding it behind the scenes? Here's where things get intriguing. Some historians believe Booth may have crossed paths with members of the Knights of the Golden Circle in the years leading up to Lincoln assassination. The KGC, by the end of the Civil War, had supposedly gone underground, transforming from a bold, empire-building organization into a secretive network of Confederate loyalists determined to keep fighting even after the South's defeat. They were angry, desperate, and willing to go to extremes. And Booth, already radicalized, may have been the perfect man for their plans. There are claims difficult to fully verify but too persistent to ignore that Booth attended secret meetings where Confederate sympathizers discussed ways to strike back at the Union. These weren't just about killing one man. Some plots talked about kidnapping Lincoln, exchanging him for Confederate prisoners, or even reigniting the war through chaos and fear. The KGC, if involved, may have seen Lincoln not just as a president, but as the symbol of Northern victory, a figure whose removal could throw the nation into disarray. And let's not forget the money. Assassinations, plots, and escape routes cost resources. Booth, despite his fame, wasn't wealthy enough to bankroll such an elaborate scheme on his own. Yet after the assassination, authorities discovered he had access to funds, safe houses, and a network of people willing to help him flee. Could this have been the lingering reach of the KGC? Some treasure hunters even claim that the Knights' legendary hidden gold financed Confederate spy operations and possibly Booth's plot itself. While hard proof remains elusive, the theory refuses to die because so many loose threads seem to point in the same direction. One of the most puzzling details is Booth's escape plan. After shooting Lincoln, Booth didn't just run blindly. He followed a carefully mapped route, stopping at safe locations as if he knew help would be waiting. Some of these safe houses were owned by known Confederate sympathizers. Others have been linked, at least through rumor, to the secret networks believed to be connected to groups like the KGC. Was this just coincidence? Or was Booth following a plan crafted long before that fateful night? Even Booth's accomplices raise questions. Men like Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and David Harold were part of the conspiracy, but their roles seemed oddly fragmented, as if they were pieces of a larger puzzle no one ever fully assembled. Powell was assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward, while Atzerodt was supposed to target Vice President Andrew Johnson, meaning the plot was just about Lincoln, but the entire line of succession. If they had succeeded, the government would have been thrown into chaos. That level of ambition feels bigger than Booth alone. It feels like the work of people with resources, strategy, and an agenda that reached far beyond personal revenge. Adding to the mystery, after Booth was finally cornered and killed, he was never given a real trial, no chance to speak publicly about possible backers or hidden motives. Some say this was simply justice served quickly. Others wonder if someone wanted Booth silenced before he revealed too much. Several alleged KGC members simply vanished in the months after the assassination, leaving behind rumors of escape routes leading to Mexico, a country the KGC had long eyed as part of their empire dream. Booth himself was supposedly headed south when Union troops finally caught up to him. For over a century, amateur historians, conspiracy theorists, and treasure hunters have chased this shadowy connection between Booth and the KGC. They point to coded messages, mysterious symbols carved into trees or found on old maps, and secretive family stories passed down through generations. Some believe Booth was just the tip of the spear, the most visible actor in a plot orchestrated by men who stayed safely in the shadows, men whose names we may never know, but whose ambitions didn't die with the Confederacy's surrender. April 14, 1865, Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C. President Abraham Lincoln sits in the presidential box, laughing softly at the play unfolding before him. It had been a long war, a brutal war, but victory was finally here. The Confederacy had fallen. The Union was preserved. For a moment, there was hope that maybe, just maybe, the nation could begin to heal. But somewhere in the shadows, plans had already been set in motion, plans that would bring everything crashing down in an instant. And this is where the whispers of conspiracy grow loudest, where the Knights of the Golden Circle and their shadowy ambitions cast long, dark shapes over history's stage. Most of us know the story of John Wilkes Booth leaping onto the stage after firing the fatal shot, shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. But what most history books don't dwell on is the strange complexity of what happened that night. This wasn't just a single man acting out of personal hatred. It was a coordinated attack. While Booth targeted Lincoln, Lewis Powell stormed into Secretary of State William Seward's home, viciously stabbing him as he lay sick in bed. At the same time, George Atzerodt was assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, though he lost his nerve and fled before carrying it out. 3 top government officials, all targeted on the same night. If all 3 had died, the entire leadership of the United States would have been decapitated in one swift blow. That is not the work of a lone assassin. That feels like the hand of something larger, something organized. This is where the theory of the Knights of the Golden Circle steps out of the shadows. By the time of Lincoln's assassination, the KGC was believed to have gone underground, operating in secret cells across the South and even parts of the North. They were bitter, angry, refusing to accept defeat even as Confederate armies surrendered. Some historians suggest that Booth's plot aligned perfectly with what the KGC wanted: chaos, revenge, and maybe even a chance to resurrect the Confederate cause by plunging the nation into political anarchy. The evidence isn't always straightforward, but there are tantalizing clues. Booth himself had Confederate contacts during the war, people who could have easily connected him to secret networks like the KGC. Safe houses along his escape route seemed prepared in advance, as though someone had paved the way long before the first shot was fired. Even the money trail raises eyebrows. Booth was an actor, not a wealthy man, yet he financed a team of conspirators, bribes, supplies, and elaborate escape plans. Where did the funds come from? Some treasure hunters and amateur historians point to the rumored KGC gold, secret caches of Confederate wealth supposedly hidden by the group to fund future operations. Could Lincoln's death have been paid for out of that shadowy war chest? And then there's the strange timing. The Civil War had officially ended only days earlier. Confederate President Jefferson Davis was on the run. The South lay in ruins. If ever there was a moment for a desperate, last-ditch strike, this was it. Killing Lincoln, Seward, and Johnson might have thrown Reconstruction into chaos, given Confederate sympathizers time to regroup, maybe even reignited the war under new terms. Booth himself reportedly believed he would be hailed as a hero in the South. But what if someone encouraged that belief? What if Booth was manipulated into thinking he was part of a grand, history-changing mission rather than just a doomed assassin? Some researchers have even suggested that Booth's plot resembled the KGC's earlier style of Operation Secret Cells. Compartmentalized plans, each man knowing only his part so the bigger picture stayed hidden. That was how the KGC supposedly operated during the war, especially in border states like Maryland, where loyalties were divided and secrecy was essential. Booth's team mirrored that approach, small, secretive, and deadly. And here's where things get even murkier. After the assassination, several alleged Confederate agents and Southern loyalists mysteriously disappeared. Some fled south toward Mexico, the same Mexico long rumored to be a safe haven for the KGC and possibly the site of their hidden treasures. Booth himself was heading that way when Union soldiers finally cornered him at Garrett's barn. Was it just coincidence, or was the entire escape plan designed to deliver him into the arms of a secret network waiting across the border? The federal government, of course, moved quickly to frame the assassination as a Confederate plot, at least in the early days. But trials were rushed, evidence sometimes mishandled, and the full story never seemed to come out cleanly. Booth was killed before he could be interrogated in depth. Others were hanged within months. Questions about wider conspiracies were left dangling, as if someone wanted the case closed as quickly as possible before too many secrets leaked out. Over the decades, letters, diaries, and secondhand testimonies have surfaced, hinting at deeper layers to the conspiracy. Some claim Booth met with high-ranking Confederate officials in Canada before the assassination. Others insist KGC agents were embedded in Washington, quietly gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to strike. The lack of definitive proof has only fueled the mystery, leaving room for speculation that the Knights of the Golden Circle, with their dreams of empire and hatred for Lincoln, may have been the unseen hand guiding the events of that bloody April night. After the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, after the chaos of trials and executions, after the dust of war had begun to settle, another story began to drift through the shadows of history, a story that seemed almost too strange to be true. It was a story of gold, Confederate gold. They called it, and of secret maps, hidden vaults, and mysterious disappearances that all seemed to trace back in one way or another to the same organization whose name had already become the stuff of legend, the Knights of the Golden Circle. For years, treasure hunters, historians, and conspiracy theorists have chased the whispers of this lost fortune. They tell of vast sums of gold and silver supposedly hidden by the KGC as the Confederacy collapsed in the final days of the Civil War. Some say it was meant to fund a secret resistance movement, a kind of Confederate underground that would rise again when the time was right. Others insist it was tied to plots far bigger than anyone imagined, including the assassination of President Lincoln itself. What we know for certain is that as Union forces marched across the South in the war's closing months, chaos reigned. Confederate leaders fled, banks emptied, and fortunes disappeared into the night. Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, was rumored to have escaped with wagons full of gold, though Union troops later captured him with little treasure in hand. So where did it go? This is where the KGC steps back into the frame. According to some accounts, the Knights had prepared for this moment all along. They supposedly created an elaborate system of secret depositories, hidden tunnels, buried caches, and booby-trapped vaults scattered across the South and even beyond. Only trusted members held the maps, marked with strange symbols and coded messages, ensuring the treasure would remain safe until it was needed again. Some treasure hunters believe these hoards weren't just gold coins and bullion, but also priceless artifacts, documents and records that could expose the full extent of the KGC's activities. If true, it would mean the group wasn't just hiding money. They were hiding secrets, perhaps even proof of their role in plots like Lincoln's assassination. Imagine what those papers might reveal about who funded Booth, who planned the escape routes, who may have been quietly pulling strings behind the curtain of history. Over the decades, countless people have claimed to find pieces of the puzzle. Old maps tucked inside family Bibles, cryptic carvings on trees and remote forests, mysterious stone markers shaped like arrows, crosses, or even owls, said to be KGC symbols pointing the way to hidden vaults. Many of these stories end the same way, with hunters digging in the wrong spot, following clues that seem to vanish into dead ends, or finding small stashes of coins but never the legendary motherlode that was supposed to be out there. One of the most persistent legends places enormous caches of gold in Texas, a state where KGC activity was believed to be especially strong. Others point to Kentucky, Arkansas, or even as far west as New Mexico. There are stories of caves sealed with dynamite, tunnels collapsing behind retreating men, and vaults designed so that opening them incorrectly would trigger deadly traps. Whether those were real or just tales told to scare off outsiders, no one can say for sure. What keeps this legend alive is that pieces of Confederate treasure really did vanish at the war's end. Some of it probably fell into private hands. Some was seized quietly by Union forces and never reported. But the sheer scale of what supposedly disappeared millions in today's dollars makes people wonder if an organized effort, like the one the KGC was capable of, spirited it away for some larger purpose. And here's where things get truly fascinating. Some researchers argue that the treasure wasn't meant to be spent right away. They claim the KGC envisioned a secret empire in exile, biding its time, waiting for the South to rise again. The gold, in this version of the story, was like a war chest for the future, funding everything from propaganda to espionage to possibly even political assassinations. Could Booth's plot have been one of the operations quietly paid for by this hidden fortune? There's no smoking gun, no single ledger or letter proving it, but the theory refuses to die because it ties so many loose threads together. Even in modern times, people are still searching. Books have been written, documentaries filmed, and expeditions launched into backwoods and mountains chasing rumors of the KGC's buried wealth. Some hunters claim to have cracked parts of the code, finding small stashes that suggest bigger ones remain. Others insist the real treasure is on gold at all but the missing, records the documents that could expose everything about the KGCS inner workings, its members and its ultimate goals. And hanging over all of this is the mystery of whether the Knights of the Golden Circle truly disbanded after the war or simply vanished into secrecy along with their fortune. Some believe they evolved into later secret societies, carrying their symbols, rituals, and hidden wealth into new generations with new agendas. If that's true, the gold and the secrets buried with it might not just be relics of the past, but part of a much longer game whose traces reach further into history than anyone ever realized. More than a century and a half has passed since the night Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford S. Theater. Yet the story surrounding his assassination and the whispers of the Knights of the Golden Circle lurking in the background refuse to fade into history. Instead, they seem to grow stranger, richer, and more tangled with every passing decade, as if the shadows cast in 1865 still stretch all the way to our present day. Because for every official record we have, there are unanswered questions, gaps in the story, and a lingering sense that something bigger was happening behind the curtain of events. Take the mysterious disappearance of key witnesses and supposed conspirators after the assassination. Some men connected to Booth's plot simply vanished in the chaos that followed, slipping through the cracks of history like ghosts. Were they terrified opportunists running for their lives or members of a secret network making their escape along prearranged routes? That question has haunted historians for generations. Some of these men were rumored to have fled south toward Mexico, where the Knights of the Golden Circle supposedly held influence and may have even hidden their legendary treasure. The idea that these escape routes were planned in advance suggests organization, strategy, and resources far beyond what Booth alone could have pulled together. And then there are the symbols carvings on trees, cryptic engravings on stones, strange maps found in dusty trunks decades later, all pointing to secret KGC codes and possible treasure sites. For many, these aren't just relics of the past, but breadcrumbs leading toward the truth about who financed Booth, who helped him flee, and why some figures in the conspiracy seemed to disappear so cleanly while others swung from the gallows. Were these symbols the signatures of a group that wanted future generations to know they existed, but not enough to reveal everything? It's the kind of mystery that keeps historians, codebreakers, and treasure hunters digging both literally and metaphorically. Modern researchers have uncovered letters and diaries from the era that hint at deeper layers of the plot. Some accounts describe secret meetings in southern safe houses, coded messages sent across enemy lines, and even discussions of killing not just Lincoln but multiple Union leaders to destabilize the entire government. Yet every time someone gets close to connecting the dots, pieces of evidence seem to be missing, burned, or locked away in private collections. It's as if the full truth was deliberately buried, leaving us only with fragments scattered across time. The treasure legends tie directly into this uncertainty. Some believe the Knights of the Golden Circle transformed after the war, shifting from a pro-slavery empire-building society into a secretive organization devoted to protecting its hidden wealth and influencing events from the shadows. According to this theory, the same treasure that may have funded Confederate spies and Booth's assassination plot could have gone on to bankroll future secret societies, political movements, or even attempts to rewrite parts of history itself. There are claims hard to prove but fascinating that the KGCS hidden fortune helped spawn later groups with their own mysterious agendas, creating a kind of secret bloodline of organizations linked by money, secrecy, and symbols. Then there's the strangest theory of all, that Booth himself may not have died in Garrett S. Barn as the history books tell us. Some conspiracy theorists argue that the man shot by Union soldiers was a decoy, allowing Booth to escape along the same secret network supposedly run by groups like the KGC. Stories emerged decades later of elderly men confessing to being Booth living under assumed names in remote towns, while others claim knowledge of Confederate gold shipments that tied directly back to Booth's escape plan. While mainstream historians dismiss these tales, the sheer number of them keeps the idea alive that the real story might be far more complicated than the official version taught in schools. And what about the federal government's role? Some researchers argue that the investigation into Lincoln's assassination was wrapped up too quickly, that key questions about funding, planning, and broader conspiracies were never fully pursued. Was this because officials wanted to present a clear, simple story to a nation already in shock, or because they feared what a deeper investigation might uncover about secret societies, Confederate sympathizers, or even Northern collaborators? The rushed trials, the immediate executions, and the limited questioning of certain suspects have fueled suspicions for over 150 years. Even today, historians and amateur sleuths continue digging through archives, decoding old maps and scanning remote landscapes with modern technology, hoping to uncover the truth. From ground-penetrating radar hunts in Texas to re-examinations of 19th-century coded letters, the search for answers hasn't stopped. Every so often, a new clue emerges, a relic, a document, a strange inscription on a forgotten gravestone, and the theories flare back to life, pulling the Knights of the Golden Circle and Lincoln's assassination back into public fascination. Some believe the full story will never be uncovered, that too much time has passed, too many records lost, too many secrets taken to the grave. Others insist the answers are still out there, buried in archives, hidden in private collections, or locked away in depositories that treasure hunters have yet to find. What keeps this mystery alive isn't just the assassination itself, but the sense that behind Booth, behind the smoke of Ford's theater, behind the fall of a nation torn by war, there might have been a secret organization whose reach went further than anyone ever realized. So here we are, standing at the crossroads of history and mystery, looking back at events that shook the very foundation of a nation. We've walked through the birth of the Knights of the Golden Circle, uncovered their grand ambitions for an empire stretching far beyond America's borders, traced the possible ties between this secretive organization and John Wilkes Booth, explored the chilling conspiracy that struck down a president and chased the whispers of vanished treasure and lost secrets hidden across generations. But as we peel back each layer, the questions only grow deeper. Was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln truly the act of one man? Or was it the final, desperate strike of a secret society determined to change the course of history? Did the hidden gold of the KGC fund plots that altered the destiny of a nation? And how much of their legacy still lingers in shadows we've yet to uncover? More than 150 years have passed, and yet the mystery refuses to die. Historians dig through archives, treasure hunters scour forgotten landscapes, and conspiracy theorists follow trails of coded symbols and secret maps, all searching for the truth behind a story that feels too big, too strange, and too connected to be coincidence. Maybe someday the final piece will fall into place: a letter, a diary, a buried vault, and the full story of the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Lincoln assassination will finally emerge from the shadows. Until then, we're left with the intrigue, the speculation, and the haunting sense that some secrets of history were never meant to stay buried forever.